to SQL Server 2012 Administration. My name is Chris Thorson, and I'm going to take you through learning SQL Server 2012, how to administer it, the databases, the files, the file groups, the performance, the various services that go with it. Now, this class is the second of 3 classes that lead towards the MCSA or MCSE specializing in SQL Server 2012. It's all about administration. You've presumably already taken the querying class for exam 70-461. In this first lesson, we're going to talk about just the features of SQL 2012, and then we're going to talk about files and file groups. Taking a look at the features, SQL, when you install it, is not just one application. It's many components with a variety of different tools. Here's a list of the most common ones. We start with the database engine itself. That's the thing that actually manages the database, the files. It manages the data. You query it, you get a result back. Then there's integration services. If you need to integrate your SQL data with other data sources, integration services manages that. We, of course, have reporting and analysis services. And then we have something called master data services. This allows you to maintain integrity of data across a whole enterprise if you have a whole bunch of different data sources. Then we have SQL Server Management Studio. This is the tool that we're going to be using the most in this class. It allows us to explore SQL and its settings and its databases in a graphical view. And it also has the query analyzer where we can just type ad hoc queries. Then there's something called SQL Server Profiler. And Profiler will take a look at your SQL queries, and it will determine what is the performance of those queries. Then the Database Engine Tuning Advisor will take what the profiler finds and make recommendations to improve performance, because as a database administrator, we're always trying to improve performance. Then there is Data Quality Services. Now, what this does is it creates a knowledge base based on your different data sources to determine the cleanness and the integrity and the reliability of that source, and then it creates rules to help clean the data based on that information. And then there are any number of tools for connecting to the data itself, for querying the data, for manipulating the data, and also just for client and server connectivity. Something new in SQL 2012 is the Service Broker. This gives native communication capabilities to the database engine, which means that an application developer could write a sophisticated app that uses the native communication capabilities of the database engine itself to message between different kinds of applications and data sources. So we have this native ability to handle messages and to queue messages asynchronously. Now, when you install SQL, you can install multiple installations. We call them instances. Like if you install various small applications, like you might have something that manages your tax receipts and another thing that does some kind of land scanning and maintains a small database of what it discovers. Chances are very good they are using a stripped down version of SQL in the background called SQL Express. You'll notice that you'll have more than one installation of SQL. Each of these installations is called an instance. So you can have multiple versions of SQL installed and running simultaneously. But when you do install it, you have to give it a name. If you don't give it a name, it's just called the default instance, and it's probably called MS SQL Server or SQL Express. But you can name it as you go. And we can see in this diagram here that we'll have a default called MS SQL Server. That's if you don't pick a name. And then we can call it Instance 1, or we can call it Tax Receipts Application 2005, or whatever we want to call it. So we can have multiple versions of SQL doing multiple things that have nothing to do with each other, all running at the same time or in the background. When you install SQL and you start creating databases, the databases have files and they have file extensions. The physical files, and this hasn't changed in, well, since forever with SQL, is the database itself has the extension MDF for the Microsoft data file. The transaction log is an LDF for the log file. And then if you include additional files, you'll have something called an NDF. Now, here's a real-world comment. When you install SQL, the MDF should really only contain the basic structure, the metadata. Any real data should actually be on a different file on an NDF, and we'll get to creating those shortly. You should also keep the database MDF, the log, and the NDFs, the actual files with the data on them. You should keep them on separate disk subsystems with different controllers to maximize on your performance. When we create these, I'm going to comment more about what are the best practices. So that's our overview of SQL 2012. The next thing we're going to talk about is file groups.